Thank you, Michael. And it's good to be back in California. I seem to go to the East Coast only when a blizzard is going to happen. It's going to be, the blizzard of whatever year. That's the year I go back to the East Coast. In any case, I have to, Jason's mention of Peggy Noonan, I was really struck. I was watching one of those Gab Fests the other day, and she was on it. And she was similarly defending Obama. And I thought, now, I'm just still trying to grapple. Is that a comment on Peggy Noonan or on Obama? And actually, probably by the end of my talk, you'll know my answer to that question. So, as I was looking back over my notes when we were proposing this panel, putting it together about a year ago, right? Just about a year ago now. I was struck by how much has changed since then. And what I was really reminded of was the extraordinary sense of expectation attached to Obama's candidacy, but especially to his presidency. And I acknowledge that as I was, sitting before my computer deciding what I was going to say, I was swept up in that sense of expectation as much as anyone. Now, some of this, of course, is related to absolutely to the momentousness of and our feeling of exhilaration of that momentousness of the election of Obama as finally as an African American president, and his own sense of the journey that had made his election possible, which had to do with not only his own journey, but a historical one as well. And of course, much of it was inspired by Obama himself, who in the course of his candidacy had visibly grown. It was an amazing thing to watch Obama learn as a candidate, and also to sort of watch him learn to rise to certain large challenges that people were continually saying were beyond his reach. Obama also inspired this sense of expectation because of his own positioning of himself as the candidate of change, the candidate of hope, but really also the candidate of transformation. Promising and incredibly energetic, in fact, Maggie said a hyper-energetic, multi-pronged, ambitious agenda. Healthcare reform. We were going to have universal health coverage. Of course, everyone was claiming that, but Obama's also claiming a transformation in terms of our willingness to take on the big challenge of climate change. A transformational agenda in education, in housing, in cities, in infrastructure. We're going to look toward a green economy. And of course, we're going to also bring in an era of transformation in financial reform. Now again, I'm talking about the promise as opposed to the actual agenda during both the campaign and in the immediate early months of the administration itself. Now, along with this, Obama promised that we were going to enter a new era, and I'm not quite sure how aware he was when he was using the rhetoric of the new era, continually using new era rhetoric of trust and accountability and transparency in government. Along with this promise was the idea that, unlike other administrations, the Obama administration was going to keep up this sort of galvanized connection with the grassroots, with the mobilization he had started with his campaign. This was, after all, an administration that invited us all to email our ideas for change. And then, when you did email your ideas for change, you'd get a boilerplate email back saying, "Hey, Alice, thanks for your great idea. Let's keep in touch." So the idea was this is truly going to be a transformational presidency on many levels. Now, historians, too, as you can tell, I was a part of this, but historians, I think, generally speaking, and maybe especially, shared in and contributed to the sense of extraordinary expectation If you think about it, among all the candidates, and certainly more than anyone we'd seen in decades, Obama seemed to understand the importance of history, seemed eager to learn from history, and absolutely, though, seemed capable of drawing really nuanced lessons from history, reasoning from history, actually developing historical arguments in his speeches that were based on actual as opposed to made-up historical knowledge. If you think about it, just I can point to two of his most renowned speeches, the race speech, of course, and the speech on financial reform at Cooper Union. Both of them are deeply historically informed. Now, one might argue with the arguments that he presents, but they're real historical arguments. They're recognizable historical arguments. And I think in that sense, Obama inspired in historians in particular a sense of real expectation. He also, of course, had a finely honed and celebrated sense of himself in history. As someone whose life and opportunities had been influenced by history, but who could actually write about himself in the form of a historical narrative and in his own voice. But as much of, if not more than Obama himself, I think the sense of expectation, a high sense of expectation associated with his presidency was fueled by the sheer magnitude of the challenges, and most importantly of the economic crisis, and the momentum with which it had been unfolding since the fall of, especially since the fall of 2008. Of course, it had been unfolding since earlier than that, but just again, the sheer momentum. Capitalism as we come to know it, deregulated, speculative, deeply inequitable, was finally being called on the carpet, or so it seemed to be, by its own internal dynamic, if nothing else. Let's not forget how remarkable it is actually to have capitalism, the word capitalism, bandied about in headlines. Usually that is a phrase we don't talk about because we just simply take capitalism for granted. Capitalism, as we come to know it, was being debated and seemed to be subject to real reform for the first time in decades, fueled again by the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. And the idea, of course, being that out of this wreckage would come both the need and the demand for transformative change, driven, if nothing else, by the recognition that there was no way we could or should try to go back to the way things were before the crash. That seemed like an impossibility.